Welcome to the Haas Forum on Sustainable Business in Practice. My name is Mark Breitbard. I am a proud graduate of the full-time MBA class of 1997. I'm also the head of the Global Gap brand. So what that means, if it's familiar to you, is that not the brand, but the event, that it's our 19th annual event. And I wish I were welcome you in person at the San Francisco headquarters on 2 Folsom Street, but instead I am here with the fake background and put myself into a Gap ad, essentially. Now, I wish we could continue this. I'm glad we can continue this even through Zoom, and it does allow us to have some people who maybe outside of the Bay Area join us. So hopefully that's happened. So the topic of sustainable and responsible business is particularly meaningful to me and our company. I was part of CSR at Haas and try to carry on the tradition in my work now. A bit about the company. For 50 years, Gap has done what Don Fisher, the founder, described as "we do more than sell clothes." Gap's committed to using business as a force for good, to help people, to help the planet, and communities where we do business. So in 2004, we were the first apparel retailer to release a social responsibility report, offering a comprehensive overview of our CSR goals and progress. And I just remember at the time it being sort of breakthrough because we were just showing it all, like where we had issues, in factory, where we had, and sort of was the spirit of transparency growing in the company. We launched Gap for Good a few years ago and have made great progress behind sustainability goals for water and cotton. We had a goal to reach to save 10 billion liters of water in early 2020 that we hit, and the work continues. In the Gap brand, 91% of our denim, which is sort of notoriously a big user of water, is now made with a Washwell program, and so exceeding a goal that we had set for of 75% by 2021. So we believe in that water is a human right. As a company, we use water at every stage. Uses water at every stage of its product life cycle, from growing cotton to manufacturing. We know we have a role to play to make access to water a reality for everyone. And I am part of a group of about 180 companies where leaders are working together with the UN Global Compact, governments, and stakeholders. So there are many other things on this list that we're doing: converting cotton to 100% sustainable. Gap Teen, you may have seen that was launched with 100% sustainable organic cotton. So continue to make progress. It is not easy, I'm sure you all know. We are not perfect. I think part of releasing and becoming transparent was trying to say perfection is what we're all aiming for, but we're not perfect. We're doing our best and making smaller changes, but we know we also can't do it alone. And I think that's why we've embraced collaboration across the industry, across the globe. And it's why nights like tonight are so important for all of us. And it's why I'm also honored to welcome Robert Strand as the panel moderator tonight. Robert is the executive director for the Center for Responsible Business and a lecturer at Berkeley Haas. His research and teaching compares the US and Nordic approaches to sustainable and socially responsible business, and working on a book that we will all read that he's also spoken about on the circuit called Sustainable Vikings. Robert holds a PhD in corporate social responsibility from Copenhagen Business School, an MBA in international business from the University of Minnesota, a BS in industrial engineering from the University of Wisconsin, but also has more than academia behind him, right? 10 years in the industry chops. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert to introduce tonight's panelists. So thank you, Robert.
All right, Mark, thank you so very much. Now you're implicitly calling me out on my age. So Mark was mumbling before. He said 1997 is when he graduated from Haas. And I have to say, we are so proud, Mark, to have you as an alum. We have such a legacy of change makers among our alums. And Mark, you are right there at the center of those change makers. So thank you so very much for that kind introduction. And I'm thrilled, just absolutely thrilled to be here this evening. discussing sustainability in practice with 3 outstanding Berkeley Haas alumni. Now, we know that building a more sustainable world requires the work of business. And Berkeley Haas has a unique opportunity to send thousands of sustainability-minded leaders like tonight's panelists into a myriad of organizations, creating the change needed to preserve our planet. And we're thrilled that just this year, Haas has made this significant progress toward redefining the future of sustainable management education through the launch of the Michaels Graduate Certificate in Sustainable Business. And we're also lucky to have the leadership of our good colleague, Michelle DeNevers, as our Executive Director of Sustainability Programs at Haas to help build and expand upon the amazing work happening across our school through curriculum, institute and center work, student programming, and drawing upon the leadership of our world-class faculty. Now, tonight's panel played a foundational role in defining Haas's leadership in sustainability during their time as students and as Center for Responsible Business Student Advisory Board members, the CRB, where I have the privilege to be the executive director. Now, they now integrate environmental impact into their work every day and social impact from a variety of industries and functions. And it is my pleasure now to welcome them back. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Anne, Adrian, and Berkeley. And so on behalf of the hundreds who are with us, I'm going to give you a round of applause. So it's so good to see your smiling faces and to be back amongst you. What I'd like to do before we dig into some of the questions where I'll ask for a little bit of a longer response, I'd like to first start with quick introductions, if we could. So please share with us your Haas degree and year, your current role, and a 60-second life highlight since graduating from Haas, if you would. And I'd like to start with you, Berkeley, our freshest alum, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me and the other panelists here tonight. I'm so excited to join you all. So I recently graduated from Haas just this last spring in 2020 from the undergraduate program. And now I currently work as a marketing coordinator at Once Upon a Farm, which is an organic kids snacking brand located right here in Berkeley in the Bay Area. So didn't have to go too far away from Berkeley in my full-time role. And a little highlight, I guess, of since graduation is really for me, in these virtual times has just been really getting into my full-time role. I've been so lucky to join a company that, challenges me to learn something new every day, even through a virtual environment. So I've been taking advantage of that and taking on as many growth opportunities as I can.
Thank you. And everybody knows it is not easy to get into Berkeley Haas, and you did it on your merits, Berkeley. But when your name's Berkeley, you kind of have a leg up on the competition. Let's just admit that.
Just a small one.
Adrian, if you'd be so kind.
Thanks, Robert. Howdy, y'all. I'm Adrian Rodriguez. I'm a managing director and CEO of Providence Capital Group, a financial services firm focused on financing biological systems like regenerative agriculture. I graduated from Berkeley Haas's full-time MBA program in 2018. And 2 moments after graduation that I've cherished was getting to work with people that inspired my journey while I was at Haas. The first was getting to teach a farmer entrepreneurship intensive at the Stone Barns Center for Agriculture and getting to collaborate with Dan Barber. The other was visiting Al Gore's family farm in Tennessee and grilling regeneratively raised beef and vegetables and talking about the future of the regenerative movement with Vice President Gore.
Fantastic, Adrian. And as Adrian and Berkeley, it's strongly indicating food. Berkeley Haas is a place for food. You are not going to find another business school that has food on the agenda like we do at Berkeley Haas. And if you want to talk about issues of social justice, of climate action, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can do it through food. So it's wonderful, Adrian, having both you and Berkeley being able to share your experiences with us here this evening. And Anne, please, if you'd be so kind.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Kramer. I, like Adrian, graduated from the full-time program in 2018, not focused in food currently, but I love food. I am a sustainable integration manager at Nike on their sustainable innovation team. And I've been at Nike for about 3 years and have been in different roles, but always in sustainable innovation. In the role right now, I guide innovation teams to design, create, and manufacture footwear products with a significantly reduced carbon impact. My quick life highlights. So I moved to Portland to work at Nike. And I recently bought a house that is over 125 years old. And I spent the last year electrifying it. So I first started with insulating the whole thing, and then I upgraded my heating. So I now have an electric heat pump. I switched out my stove and my water heater. So, and then I just signed on to a community solar program. So all of the electricity from my house will be generated from a local solar farm about an hour east of Portland. And I am a big fan of electrification, so much that I actually volunteer in my spare time doing some fundraising, strategy, and ops work for a local nonprofit that helps low-income Portland families electrify their homes.
Love it, Anne. Yes, electrify everything. When we talk about sustainability, that's one thing that we hear. And Anne, I don't think that Haas probably trained you in those specific skills that you needed for your home, but I hear the values. I hear the defining leadership principles coming out in what you're offering here. So thank you. So now we've had a chance just to very quickly meet all of our wonderful panelists. And I would like to, if I could go back the other way here, Anne, I'd like to start with you. So you, all of you, were very involved in sustainability work and at the CRB, the Center for Responsible Business, as students. Would you be so kind as to share a little bit about how the CRB and those roles and projects that you had and engaged with through the CRB shaped your Haas student experience? And Anne, could we start with you, please?
Sure. Yeah, I think as a little bit of context, so I came to Haas I was one of the few people that came to Haas with sort of a clear idea of what I wanted to test, and then ended up getting a job exactly in that. That's not that common, I've learned, but I came to Haas specifically to pivot into corporate sustainability. But other than being the nerd that read all the corporate sustainability reports, really, I read them all, I had no background in this field. And so the sort of single biggest thing I wanted to do coming on campus was getting sort of a blended like academic and experiential opportunities that would help me learn a little bit more about corporate sustainability, see if that was really what I wanted to do, and pressure test some different job opportunities. So I think kind of the CRB was one of the main drivers for me applying to Haas. I knew I wanted to be somewhere where there was a central hub around sustainability, because that doesn't just mean, sort of what comes from that is a community of people who attend the school itself, who care about these issues. It also means that there's connection to companies and there's events on campus. And so I kind of dabbled in all of those things while I was at the CRB. I sort of supported a couple events that were being run by the CRB, events like this. I, in my second year, put on a food waste event because we were unlaunching the zero waste building on campus. And so that kind of felt like a good collaboration. Took some classes that the CRB supports and connected with professors sort of outside of the classroom. But I think the biggest thing that influenced like my life now is just all of the friends that I made through the CRB. And like, Adrian and I know each other, but our group from our year, they're all doing such awesome things. And I'm still in contact with them and talk to friends on a like monthly basis about, hey, like we're thinking about investing in this company in the footwear and apparel space. What do you think? And so that was just so great to have that community on campus. And now that I'm not on campus anymore, I still feel that CRB community with me.
Oh, that's wonderful, Anne. And just we love to hear that, and that fostering that community and that movement. And the CRB, of course, is an extension of Haas and the defining leadership principles. And that's so wonderful to hear. Adrian, would you be so kind as to share a bit about how the CRB and your engagement, how that shaped your Haas student experience?
Sure, would love to. And please cut me off if I ramble on for too long. I can talk about this topic for hours. But for me, being a typical Haasie, I was frustrated with the status quo for capital markets when I was working on Wall Street. And I knew that the capital markets had to evolve to better align with the needs of our planet. what the CRB afforded me was this beautiful, dense, fertile ecosystem that I needed to finally meet industry pioneering leaders who I could test my ideas with and discuss ways to make them a reality. So I got to the stage where I knew what I wanted to do and I needed to test it, but it's so helpful when you actually can talk to people who are in the world doing this day in, day out and are leading in each of their fields. So for me, that manifested in a couple of ways. A book that really inspired my growth and my transition was called Reinventing Organizations. And that book is about how can we move the way that we run organizations into a more holistic manner. And one of the companies that book highlights deeply is Patagonia. And the Center for Responsible Business has a deep relationship with Patagonia through the Patagonia Case Competition. So my year, given someone who was interested in agriculture, it seemed kismet, but the Patagonia Case Competition was all centered around how do you scale regenerative agriculture? So to show up and to have the company that I wanted to emulate, to learn more about, to also seed a question that was directly what I wanted to focus on, was a really rewarding experience. Through that journey, I was able to hang out with Vincent Stanley, the chief philosophy officer at Patagonia, and really talk about what my vision of the future of the capital markets was. And he was like, yep, that's what it should be. Go do it. And here are ways that you can go manifest that. So later on in my Haas experience, I actually had the chance to work for Patagonia in their venture capital fund, Tinshed Ventures, to really pioneer how can you invest in the next Patagonias, the next triple bottom line companies that can change the planet, and also help them write their standard for regenerative organic agriculture. So the connection to Patagonia and companies like Patagonia that the CRB has was something that really changed the arc of my career. Other highlights were meeting Ann Simpson of CalPERS. To me, long-time horizon investors sometimes have the best agency to invest in biological systems. And through the relationship with Anne, she invited me to come to a CalPERS board meeting where they're discussing sustainability, to really show me firsthand all the different stakeholders she has to manage in her attempts to move that extremely large pool of assets to more sustainability. Similar to that was Bob Eccles, where me, Robert, and Bob were just in Robert's office talking about how do we move away from just a focus on risk and return in portfolios and to talk about more holistic financial metrics. And Bob's leading and helped found an organization called the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, SASB, which is helping companies add material, sustainable metrics onto their reporting standards to make sure that companies move past just return and myopically focusing on return and growth for growth's sake to incorporating other positive and negative externalities that are tied to their business. The last thing I would just mention is I found my business partner through the CRB. It's easy to meet smart people. It's a lot harder to find smart people with a good heart. And I think what I found in the CRB were, as Anne touched on, a bunch of allies that I could collaborate with. So my business partner, FJ Salos, he's brilliant. He's one of the best fathers I know. And we've been business partners ever since graduating. And what we're doing is pretty pioneering, and to do it yourself gets really lonely. And I know that having him by my side has allowed us to continue on. And I think we're just impressed and amazed by how far we've gotten and how bright the future looks. The last thing I'll just mention is people at the CRB live their values. And I think we're at this point where we all need to actually live our values more. And as Anne touched on, just having Chew Hall open while we were there and having it be the first zero waste building on for any business school campus, that was a way that I had to really think about how do I produce no waste in my own day-to-day life? And that was challenged to me by the building that I was in, and I appreciate the hard work that the CRB had behind that. And if you've ever been to a CRB event, their catering is delicious, but also healthy, locally sourced, and just showed me how you can feed people at events and not have it be anemic conference food, but to actually have the values of sustainable agricultural systems behind it.
Well, Adrian, you offer us a wealth there, and you also remind us, Anne, before you said that you weren't touching food, but then you remind us that food waste that you were hitting at food waste while you're at Haas. And if food waste was a country itself, it'd be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind China and the United States. So a very important topic in and of itself. Adrian, one of the things I just would like to draw out from what you said here, because it speaks to what is so special about the CRB. It's so special about the folks who are it's so special about Berkeley Haas. And that is you came from Wall Street. You're in the mainstream of the mainstream, and you're drawn to Berkeley Haas. And you're drawn to Haas. Haas is, let's face it, it's an elite business school. It is in the mainstream. It is connected. It is influential. And it's Berkeley Haas. And we have this progressive sort of mindset. And I like the way you characterize it more. Smart people, but it's caring folks who come with purpose and see business as a means through which to affect change. And that is a community of folks that I've heard, when you're sitting in one of those many times, I have the privilege to talk with you in the office, and we've got all these books and they're flying around. And you talk about, swimming in a stream. Yeah, swimming in the same stream as other folks. And we feel that at Berkeley Haas. Now, Berkeley, your experiences are more recent. So you will undoubtedly have some good examples here. Tell us a little bit about, from your experience, the CRB and how that shaped your student experience while at Haas, please.
Yeah, so the CRB was definitely the most transformative part of my experience at Haas, but Berkeley as a whole. As an undergrad, you face this kind of goal of figuring out what you want to do with your life, which is no small feat. And before I came into the CRB community, I really knew kind of what my passions were, but didn't really know how to put those together with a career. And luckily, I was so excited that I actually got to work with the CRB, not only on the student advisory board, but also as a student employee. So I spent many hours in the CRB offices throughout my undergrad time. And, echoing what Anne and Adrian have already said, what really sets the CRB apart and Berkeley Haas as a whole is that community, the smart people with heart. And that was one of the most valuable things that the CRB gave to me during my time at Berkeley. And, with that comes the insight into the career path I want to pursue, the kinds of companies that I want to work for. But most importantly, I think, like Anne mentioned, the friends, the mentors, just, like all of you. And I am 100% sure that the CRB, will continue to remain an important part of my life, even though I have graduated and moved on beyond the academic side of it.
Thank you so much, Berkeley. And that's another thing. We have the privilege also with our student workers too, engaging, and our students and our student advisory board. And this is across Haas. Our students drive. They're our engine. They're also our compass, who we look toward. So that's also a way of saying your service has been so important. In the CRB, we've been around for 20 years at Haas. And Haas was fertile grounds to launch a thing like the Center for Responsible Business. And so when I talk about the CRB, really we're talking about Haas here. I'd like to pose another question, and I'd like to start with you, Anne, and then I'd like to go to Berkeley if I could after that, and pose it to Adrian too, because I'd like to share. Well, let me share kind of a framing first, and then I have a specific question for each of you. Because as we know, sustainability, it doesn't always show up in formal titles. And this is something that when I have the privilege to talk to so many students, oftentimes one of the common questions is, I want to be in sustainability. So there's this intent kind of desire to have sustainability somewhere explicitly show up. Could you share with us more about your functions and how sustainability comes to life in your work, and whether it's explicit or if it's much more implicit, embedded in there? So Anne, just a specific question with that kind of as an overall framing. How is sustainability organized at Nike, and how does this organizational structure allow or enable maximum impact? And then if I could just to get a little provocative here, how can someone reconcile selling consumer goods, making more stuff that may or may not be better for the planet, and reconcile that with sustainability? Please, Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. Two of the most common questions I get. So as a little bit of context about Nike and sustainability. In 2018, so sustainability has been a focus for the company for over 20 years, really sort of front and center, but it has traditionally been sort of organized as a little bit of a siloed part of the business and sort of rolled up under innovation. In 2018, that entire organizational structure shifted. A new chief sustainability officer was put in who has a deep background in operations and worked in Asia for a large amount of his career. And the biggest thing that changed is instead of a centralized team, it's now a decentralized model, which means that the CSO, the chief sustainability officer, has some 12, maybe it might even now be 15 different dotted line reports. Each of those different 12 people run their own teams throughout the business. And what that means is that each team has an accountability to deliver something specific on sustainability. That's sort of the biggest pro of this whole model is you have more accountability, you have experts in the space. So I roll up under the innovation team. There's a transportation team. There's a design-based team. There's a communications team. And it shows kind of what the change did is actually embed the different functions where they most sort of cross-functionally made the most sense. So I think a big challenge of moving from like a centralized to decentralized model is pro, more accountability, more experts in the space, con, being a connector and creating that connective tissue between the different parts of the organization is now more important than ever. And that actually is a huge part of my role too, is connecting those different things. But I challenge people a lot of the time, like if you're newer to sustainability and thinking about corporate sustainability, it's really important to ask a company how they're organized, because where sustainability rolls up in a company tells you a lot about how they prioritize sustainability. If it's a small team under communications, you can maybe guess that they might not really be doing the work. If it's under operations or it's under design, or if it's under a part of the business that's core to the business, then that's where you're talking. You're starting to see that shift more and more, but I always encourage people, like when you start having conversations with people, say, how's your business organized? How many sustainability employees do you have? And you can learn a lot from that answer. So that's sort of how Nike has done it, and they've changed over the years. But I've actually encourage everybody to go look at our impact report and the 2025 targets that just came out this week. But you'll see a whole bunch of different, very concrete quantitative targets. Each of those are owned by different teams, and they're each driving them, all laddering up to the CSO. But that matters because now we can drive accountability a lot better. I think this other question about sort of reconciling, working in a consumer goods space, or essentially, selling more stuff, and sustainability. I mean, I get this question a lot, and honestly, I do think there is a bit of like a moral reckoning that everyone who is thinking about working in consumer goods or products has to do around this. And I guess for me, the two reasons to work at a company like Nike is the size that the size and scale that Nike has means that we have the ability to influence and change entire systems in manufacturing and supply chain. Nike is bigger than our next 5 biggest competitors combined. We are, just for a point of scale, we're, I think, either the biggest or the second biggest employer in Vietnam. We are a non-significant part of their GDP, and we are affiliated with all the biggest chemical companies in the world. Every single one of those means we have a huge ability to influence an entire system. And I think that, the brand side of this, the connection that Nike has to consumers and to athletes, means that we have the ability to change consumer mindsets. And that's actually something I would like to see Nike do more of. And I know that we will in the future, but, let's do more around taking our product back at the end of the day, or be the biggest refurbishment and resale program in the country. Let's encourage slow shipping and not air freighting product. And let's start educating consumers about carbon footprinting. That's all stuff that smaller companies are doing now. But once Nike gets in the game and starts doing it, you'll start to see people be like, oh yeah, I know 10 kilograms of shoe, that 10 kilograms of carbon, that's the average for a pair of footwear. People just start knowing that fact. So to me, it's like, what can you think about the impact that you want to have? And yes, you can do that in a bunch of different ways, but the benefit of doing it at a giant scaled industry leading company is that you can do it at a scale that many other companies can't.
And you've offered one nugget in there that I just wanted to draw out, because you talked about innovation and sustainability. And I'll say this is where I get very excited when companies, and I see it at Nike, this idea of using sustainability as a lens for innovation. And I like that mindset. And where I'm two areas I'm most interested in innovation these days. One is innovating your business model. And that's what you're talking about there at the end also, is the systems level change. We must change this system of this cradle to grave, throw it away thing into exactly, circularity. And how do companies make money doing this? The other area I'm most interested in is innovations in policy, because it all fits in with the systems. We need to set up good, smart policy. And I would suggest also we'd be wise in the United States to use words like smart policy as opposed to regulation, because regulation is something you inherently should be against. Smart policy, can't argue against that. Oh, you're offering really good nuggets here with respect to, I like this idea, innovation. Berkeley, if I could switch over to you, how are you navigating and approaching your work with sustainable business lens when entering the corporate business world for the first time? And if there are any experiences or particular classes at Haas that you would point to that perhaps prepared you well?
Yes, so one of the best courses I took during my time at Berkeley Haas was, no surprise, a course run by the CRB. This was the Sustainable Business Consulting course, which allowed groups of students to work together with companies on their most pressing sustainability issues. One thing that I think about a lot now that I am working full-time is that course really gave me one of the closest things to real world experience that I had in an academic setting. And not only that, as I think about how, I'm bringing a sustainability lens to my work every day, it really taught me how to frame sustainability issues in the context of the larger business. Like Anne was talking about, it really shouldn't be a siloed, separate thing. It should be embedded into broader business decisions every day. And so that course specifically, in conjunction with a lot of other learnings I had during my time there, really allowed me to kind of bring that mindset to my work. And like you kind of frame the question up, my title does not involve sustainability, but, I've been lucky to have a really incredible team and company that has been really supportive of sustainability and bringing, these practices up to the forefront of the strategy. So I think that was probably one of the most important things that I had.
And the classes you're talking about, yes, indeed. We at the undergraduate and at the MBA level, a lot of these real life project-based courses. And there are applied innovation courses that are a requirement at Haas. And the CRB, we play an important role of connecting these courses with great projects out in industry. And that's a way we're bringing real challenges of the world and folks in the world. And oftentimes, many times, they're alumni who bring us our great projects, because we love alumni when you bring us the projects from your companies, because you have a vested interest in Haas also, and giving with our students and developing that relationship. So there's a not so subtle sales pitch for those of you with companies that have potential projects to check us out at Haas. And there are a number of ways that you can engage in a number of different areas, not just the Center for Responsible Business, but we want to connect with you on those sorts of things. Berkeley, great examples. Thank you so much.
And I guess one more thing, just to follow up that sales pitch, was I was so excited that it really did come full circle. Once Upon a Farm, my company actually did a consulting project this past fall through that same course. So it was really so exciting for me and the company, to see that learning experience, give it back, to the next generation of change makers.
I love this. And it gets to the conversations that you're raising before about a community. I mean, that's what we're building here, is a community and fostering that. And it's through many different areas. Thank you so much. And thanks for adding that, Berkeley. That's such a great addition. And Adrian, as a financier, and I would have expected you to have your suit. And yes, as a financier, could you please share your thoughts on how the capital markets need to evolve to better support sustainable and regenerative enterprises?
Absolutely. And before I dive into that, I think it might be worth explaining what we do here at Providence Capital Group to serve some context on what I'm going to say in regards to that question. So as a firm, we're a diversified financial services company with three practice areas. Two of them relate to enterprises, and one of them relates to asset holders. So on the enterprise side, we provide advisory and fundraising services for regenerative enterprises. When you're looking to raise patient capital that's mission aligned, and you're asking for more tailored bespoke terms, you need to be even more buttoned up than an enterprise looking for straight venture capital money. So part of our work is finding regenerative pioneers who are doing groundbreaking work that need growth capital. And before they tap the capital markets, how can we hone their business model, their strategy, and get them as investable as possible so they can be a setter of turns and not a taker of turns? So that's the part of our business that we start with our clients, and then we move to capital and fundraising services. We're basically an investment bank, so we have a network of over 600 investors that we take our clients to and try to find people who have mission alignment, whether it's in terms of advice that these investors can bring, but much more importantly, the time horizon of their investment, as well as return expectations and how they define impact. So our goal is to always take our enterprises and to find them the best capital partners that can be along for the long mission. And there's not going to have to be a period of greenwashing where they have to revert back to lower and lower impact scores. So that's part of our business. The second part is working with asset holders. Right now, we're working mostly with family offices and foundations, but it's no secret that we're on the cusp of the largest wealth transfer in history, and our generation wants their money to be invested according to their values. And right now, most portfolios are measured by risk and return and some benchmarks that relate to publicly traded portfolios. So our goal is to help asset holders start thinking about, what does a regenerative asset allocation look? How can you transition your portfolio of assets from being invested just in conventional products to an asset allocation that's 100% regenerative? And that's a longer term journey. And we are working with pioneering family offices and foundations who want to really define what that space looks like. So in each of those services that we provide, one theme that comes up is we need more patient capital. This idea of moving fast and breaking things, especially when it relates to natural systems, doesn't work. And when you're dealing with natural systems, it's much more important that you have intentionality, that you move slowly and you grow things. So there's this huge mismatch right now where the financial structures of vogue, VC funds, private equity funds, the time horizon just doesn't match those of biological systems. In a VC fund, you need to typically exit an investment in 7 years and have at least a 10x return. How do you do that when you're planting trees and it takes a tree 7 years to reach maturity? So one theme that we need to evolve is, how do we get more patient capital to finance investments in biological systems that human life and viability of this planet rely on? Similar to that is, we need to redefine what portfolio benchmarks are. Right now, most people look at their portfolio and just say, okay, the stock market has returned 7 to 9% over the last 20, 30 years. I want my impact portfolio to do the same thing. And you can make good money investing in regenerative systems, but I think it's foolish to use a benchmark, a historical benchmark, where that return, a portion of it was predicated on extraction from the environment and depleting natural resources. And another portion of that return also has attribution to human rights violations across the globe. So to me, we really need to have an honest conversation of what are forward-looking benchmarks, and not using historical benchmarks that should have asterisks on it that highlight the fact that there is environmental degradation as well as human rights violations embedded in that high return. And the last thing that's also related to that is true cost accounting. Right now, we're just looking at risk and return, but we're not looking at all the other tertiary positive benefits and negative benefits of some of our business practices. And it's really important that over time that we start looking at those positive and negative externalities and having that be part of return as well as financial reporting.
Adrian, you talk about patient capital, and it really makes me think of just such an opportunity that we have at Berkeley Haas. Property ownership is central to the idea of capitalism. And what you're getting at here also is you're highlighting for us, there are different philosophies and approaches to ownership. And we see oftentimes in an American context, in our American capitalistic context, a tendency toward an extractive relationship of ownership. I own something and I want to suck out as much as I possibly can. Maybe I own shares of a company. I want to suck out that profit quickly. Maybe I own land, this sort of a relationship, vis-a-vis a stewardship relationship of ownership and an idea that, quite frankly, is a conservative kind of traditional sort of ideal, which seems like perhaps there's opportunity that can help us cross some political lines here in this era of conflict that we find ourselves in, to appeal to some common sense conservative stewardship ideals. And it strikes me that the kind of folks that we have represented on this panel and the people undoubtedly who are joining us this evening, the Berkeley Haas alums and the friends of Berkeley Haas, that this idea of stewardship in ownership, an idea of reimagining American capitalism, that Berkeley Haas can be the place to do that. And that excites me. That frankly, that excites me. And we need that. We need that sort of leadership to usher in a new era of American capitalism. And I dare I say, I think I'm looking at three folks who are going to help us do that here. So I would really like to hear from you, each of you, in response to, as far as critical change that we as a society must make in our approach to sustainable business to face the future effectively. So a broad kind of, what are you thinking about? What's some change, given there's a lot of things that we need to be focusing on. So what do you see as being critical change that's necessary to approach sustainable business to help us to have a more sustainable, a better future? And I'd like to, if I could, I'd like to start with, well, you're all young, but I'm going to go with the most youthful individual that we have here, at least chronologically. Berkeley, would you be so kind? What do you see as the most critical change? What's something that is, or I could also say that kind of inspires you, excites you, some change that you want to be part of helping to usher in?
Yeah, so this is definitely something I think about quite often, especially with the incredible education I received, really pushing me to question every day. And when I ponder this, I think it really is kind of a two-pronged approach. There's not just one answer. The first thing I think is all of us, as consumers, we all hold a lot more power than we think we do. So I think we really need to hold businesses accountable and, ask questions where our dollars are going and make sure that what we're supporting is, what our values are aligned with. And that can be anything from the food that you buy at the grocery store, of course, what I'm more closely involved with, to, what Adrian has been talking about, where you're investing your money in the long term. And then from the other side of things, on the business side, each of us as an employee, as a founder, any role we play in the business world, I think transparency is very important, really sharing progress, goals, successes, and failures, all of it, with other companies, with consumers, because really learning from each other, as companies, as individuals, is, in my opinion, the best way that we're going to move forward as a society. And so transparency always comes down to really being the starting block for, that group teamwork. And that also kind of goes well with, of course, communicating with your consumers as a company, your users of your product or service, is how can you explain what you're doing and also, hear from them what they're interested in terms of the progress they want to see made. So I think it's really, those two pieces of the consumer and the business working together that are really going to be able to, shift society as a whole.
Thank you for that, Berkeley. And I would also emphasize there too, in terms of consumers, one other thing that we consume, and folks like you who come from Haas, you consume effectively a job, a role, and seeing that the amount of, it's very difficult to study every product that we touch on a daily basis. But when we talk about that choice to join a particular firm, that is something that we spend a lot of time deliberating on. And I think that that kind of mindset of consumerism and being a more activist consumer, us and our Berkeley Haas alums, they apply this as they're consuming jobs. And that, your talent influences change so much because employers want you. And I'd like to go to you, if I possibly could here, the most critical challenge as you see it as a society that we're facing. And maybe with that, you could, riff with a little bit, something that you're most interested in, inspired by, passionate about.
Sure. My answer is so similar to yours, Berkeley, but to really start with the power that every single, I don't even like the word consumer because that implies that all we're doing is sort of taking, but just like individuals have. And it's not just people should be making tough decisions or sort of questioning things like, should I really be flying as much as I was before? Should I really be eating meat? Should I buy all that stuff? Like, we know now as individuals, like what's driving climate change and what's driving the footprint, but it's not your responsibility to change the systems. It's not your fault that jet fuel burns as much carbon as it does. What you should be questioning is like, why aren't we getting electric planes out there much faster? And why isn't the agricultural system shifting faster? And some of that is voting with your dollars. And some of that is just asking questions of companies constantly. And I can tell you it makes a difference because I would not have this job if consumers didn't start caring about footwear and apparel and where their products come from, what happens to them at the end of life, and the guilt that a lot of people have for buying stuff that then ultimately mostly ends up in landfill. So it really does matter. And I think I would just encourage everybody, like, find whatever channels you can. Like, complaining to a friend is not really enough, but like, get online, like write emails, like it does matter. And then I would say, like, on the company side, the thing that needs to happen, businesses need to take much bolder stances. And like, I would love a company like Nike to say, like, we will be fossil fuel free by 2030 or 2035, and actually sort of draw a hard line in the sand that will dramatically shift industries. I'd want a company like Nike to stop sourcing from companies that have no plan to get to zero carbon emissions by a certain date. And I want a company like Nike to take responsibility for every single piece of product that it makes and have a plan or a method for every consumer to do something with it. And I think you're starting to see that more with companies, but it's, I'm impressed with a lot of the tech companies that have come out with big targets in the last year. Microsoft saying that they're going to basically not only be carbon zero, but they are essentially going to offset all emissions they have ever created. And that's really awesome. But I want to see like even more statements that create larger industry change. Like, we need to get off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And the sooner that big companies that are relying on them, which is every company, can start shifting away from them and investing money and making that stance, the better.
Love that, Anne. And you highlight something here. You mentioned the word guilt. If sometimes we feel guilt, and I also, we are all hypocrites. I hate fossil fuels. I can't wait to get back on an airplane. I can't wait to get back to Copenhagen. I love to travel. I'm a hypocrite. And for us to pay attention where we are hypocrites, because that's where we need systems change. Any area where we desire to do something else, but we do it this way. I get on, after living in Copenhagen, I now have little bicycles in my veins when I come here. But there are times when I could only go a mile away and I hop in the car. And I have to think about that. Why did I do that? Why did I get on a bicycle? Well, there was an unsafe passage here or this. Some of the systems changed. And then for us, I can't just say, okay, I can allow myself to be a hypocrite, but for us to be aware that that's where systems change is necessary and to pay attention to that. Excellent offerings here. Adrian, if I could turn to you, please. What do you see is the most critical challenge that we're facing, and or what are you inspired by? What are you engaging with and excited about?
Absolutely. And I'll try to keep it brief, just given where we are with time. But from my perspective, we need to give CEOs of large companies the room to entirely reinvent the systems that they use to produce products. We need to move to 100% circular economy. And right now, it's just really good business to sell you a habitual product that you have to throw away and then buy again. And most CEOs are held to a profit margin that has been defined by that habitual use throwaway model, and they now need to go to a circular model. And how are they going to do that while still hitting the targets they have over the last 15, 20, 30 years? So, I appreciate people like Larry Fink at BlackRock saying this needs to change in a drastic way, and we need to have a different scorecard that actually allows our CEOs to retool their entire supply chain. And I'm not very hopeful that a lot of these companies are going to be able to do that and hit the return numbers they have over the last 10 years while retooling everything. So to me, there needs to be a more honest conversation of how do we give CEOs the ability to actually reinvent their entire supply chains and not have them hit double-digit IRRs in the process. I just don't think that's feasible. And I think if we put all our eggs in that basket, we're going to be at 2030, and we're going to have a lot of sad CEOs who haven't hit their net zero goals or negative goals. So I think from my perspective, how can asset holders, how can governments, how can we push these industries, but also give them resources to do a transformative change that they need to do. So I think deep down, that's how I feel about the capital markets influencing that question. I also think that we need to move from a demand-driven economy to a supply-driven economy. In agriculture, there's a term called the stocking rate. What is the regenerative equilibrium this land can produce? This cattle can support 1 cow. This acre can support 2 cows, whatever it may be. We need to understand what can our land base produce where we're not depleting it and where we can actually sustain it. So to me, this notion of a stocking rate is a supply-driven economy and not a demand-driven economy. And that's very different from how the American economy is set up. I also think we don't have a connection with nature. This country has really lost its connection to its land base. And I think I love technology. I think technology has a lot of value, but technology isn't the silver bullet that's going to solve everything. And I think the more our country realizes that we actually are part of nature and we need to think about our part in that system, to opposed to saying we can use technology to innovate our way out of all our dilemmas. I think that's also a pathway that's going to lead us pretty sad in 2030.
Well, Mark earlier had mentioned my passion and the research that I do in the Nordic region. So I need to plan a Norwegian term, friluftsliv, the free outdoor life. That's something, it's a mindset, and couldn't agree more. And particularly with kids, children belong outside. Children should be outside and independent of weather. There is no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing, as they say in the Nordic region. So strap on the rain gear and get kids outside. But this connection is so important. It's part of being a holistic, hopeful person. And with that, I'd like to ask you very, very briefly, if you could be very brief, each of you, on this idea and the notion of hope. I would like to ask you each, what gives you hope? And then turn it over, because we have some great questions that we've collected from our wonderful audience here. So please, I'd like to, if I could, we'll go Berkeley, Adrian, then Anne, if we could, please. So Berkeley, please, what gives you hope? Very briefly, if we could, for each of you.
Yeah, so, just to echo what you just said, I would say spending some quality time in nature, always brings me back. I think all of everyone probably on this Zoom at one point or another has had some form of climate doom or angst. And, you know, I am no stranger to that as well. But, you know, spending some time in nature, in the awe of wildlife, you know, that always kind of brings me back and reminds me, you know, what we're all working for.
Adrian.
You know, I have to say my daughter, and, you know, just, you know, her being an Indian American growing up in Berkeley, when at a point in time we have our first female vice president who is also of Indian descent and grew up in this area, gives me a lot of hope to see what Raina can do in her lifetime. And to me, I think as leaders, we can have masculine qualities, we can have feminine qualities. I think over the last 50 years, there's been an over-indexing in masculine qualities. And I think I'm excited to see the pendulum swing the other way. And instead of ego, command and conquer mentalities, it's more about nurturing, community, reciprocity. And so I'm excited for both male and female leaders to really embody the divine feminine in their leadership style.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. Hope for me, my children. And there's a self-portrait that I received for my last birthday. Mikkel on the left, who's 7, and Jonas on the right, who's 5. And they're my pride and joy and purpose. And I feel my life's aligned with them as my purpose and these conversations that we're having together. And what gives you hope?
Everybody else who is working in this space. And you mentioned climate doom, Berkeley. That's a real thing. And it's finally now being studied and it's sort of being captured by mental health professionals, but it's getting worse because the climate's not getting better. But it's created a fire in a ton of people. I've recently gotten involved with a couple local advocacy groups and seen the 15-year-olds as part of the Sunrise Movement in PDX who are getting after industry for cutting down trees in Oregon. Is just like, they are so much more organized than I was, and they are going to fight for this planet. And seeing them plus the 80-year-olds who were also part of the same movement and writing like letters to different pipelines and trying to get them shut down, like seek out other people that are doing work that is totally different than yours, but also advocating in this space, because every little action matters. And it is so nice to see what other people are doing. It gives me hope every day.
Love that. And that's where I feel such privilege to be part of the incredible University of California, Berkeley, because I am around you all and you give me hope. And this is, I feel we have something very special that we have. I'm gonna turn it to a couple of questions that our participants have in Berkeley. You're in demand. I want to start with you if I could. And Tucker has a question for you. He says, Berkeley, what do you think of the future of packaging will look like, especially for things that will always need some sort of packaging, such as children's snacks, as we move toward decarbonization?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that we think about quite a lot. If you don't know, Once Upon a Farm, we have several products in a plastic pouch format. And so this is kind of one of the biggest questions and problems that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So as you probably all know, currently there is no real recyclability available for that kind of packaging. And so we have kind of taken the approach of, you know, trying to throw our weight at the system and pushing forward the recycling system as a whole. So we're working really hard with our packaging providers, with other companies, on how we can develop a mono-material recyclable pouch. So, you know, the infrastructure for that is not fully built out in the US. However, we have seen success with it in other countries, most notably in Europe. And so we're working really hard to figure out, one, you know, the technology, how can we make that work, food safety and sealing and all of that. And then secondly, you know, how do we communicate with our consumers, get them to understand how to be a part of that kind of new to them, probably, recycling system. And then, you know, the last part of it is really the profitability around recycling as a system. And so we definitely do not have all the answers, you know. like we opened up the panel, you know, none of our companies are perfect. And I think recognizing, you know, those problems is the best way that we can find that growth. And so we're trying, you know, we've decided to take the approach of, you know, let's push the system forward because, you know, it's not just pouches that are the problem here. There's a lot of, you know, various types of packaging. I'm sure many of you have granola bar wrappers littered around your house. So we think that that's the best method for now is to, you know, push for that full systemic change.
Great, Berkeley. Thank you very much for that. We have another question that's in, Anne, I think that this may be more directed toward you. It's been discussed today that a major component of being involved with a large corporation, despite some moral reckoning, is the power to change and influence the world. How do I justify the consumer goods space versus the sustainability contradiction at a smaller company or a startup?
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to work for a company that is all going to be selling a product or service, and you have to be sort of like morally comfortable with what they're selling. And there's a couple ways to look at it. You can be comfortable with it because of change that you're affecting upstream and manufacturing. You could be comfortable with it because you think the actual selling of that product does make somebody's life better at the end of the day. Or it can be a personal thing, which is I'm here to learn. And I know that I am going to learn everything that I can about marketing or branding or strategy or operations from this company. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to go work at a company where the product or service is inherently sustainable. And those are trade-offs you're going to have to make throughout your career. You know, very honestly, like I see myself probably in my future going back and forth between the private and public sector, or going back and forth between small and big companies in the private sector, where the good or product that's sold could be more consumer goods, or it could be, let's say, like an energy service that inherently is more sustainable. So I think it's less I think there's a little bit more pressure when you're thinking about this, right? Coming out of business school or undergrad, where it's like, this next job is my defining job and it's going to launch my career in this space. No, your career in this space is long, because all of us are in this for the long-term play, and everything that you're learning now is going to help you or an industry later. So think about it that way. Like, your career journey is long as you're learning at the very least, and then you feel good about what's being sold, and you feel good about change that you can make, even if it's smaller within your organization or small within a specific system. That all matters. This is not me trying to give you some sort of moral justification. Like, ask yourself hard questions. I was not willing to go work for a company like Coca-Cola, for instance. Like, they're a good company. They're doing good things in sustainability. I don't believe in their product. I don't believe that selling sugar drinks is better for people, and I just couldn't get behind it. I can get behind selling footwear and apparel products that promote people going outside and having a healthy lifestyle. I can get behind that. So ask yourself those questions, but don't think that one job is the be all end all. There's always something you can learn from it, especially if you have that attitude wherever you go.
And your reflections here are so helpful for so many folks as folks consider their different career paths, and that it takes all types of folks. It takes good, caring folks in a Coca-Cola to help a Coca-Cola evolve, but that doesn't mean that the rest of us, or let's say a fossil fuel company, I think is even easier. I hope that fossil fuel dies a very quick and rapid death. That said, we need good, caring folks in fossil fuel companies to make them as good as stewards as they possibly can be. So they need to evolve that company. But we don't just need an evolution, we need a revolution. We need revolutionary new business models that put unsustainable business models out of business. And it's a both and. And so I think that it's both a pragmatic and a progressive sort of approach that you are proposing here. Berkeley, if I could go back to you here, because a question that came in, and this goes for anyone. If you say, maybe I'll direct that to somebody else, and one of the panelists can also chime in on this. But here's a question: what do you think of creating access or affordable solutions for the most vulnerable populations, and maintaining a business model that has that degree of that kind of sustainability mindset at its core. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that's an awesome question. And again, something that we do a lot of work on at Once Upon a Farm. So something that we're super proud of, and has been really part of kind of the core of our mission from the beginning, is nutrition, childhood nutrition, making sure that we're feeding, the next generation the best possible food. And we do recognize, that if you go check us out in your local store, it's not a cheap product. And so something that we have spent a lot of time and resources against is getting our products WIC certified, so that, our products are not just available to folks who can afford the high price, but also, to all kids who need this kind of healthy food. And that is a very complicated process. Every state has its own requirements and different formulas. Only certain ingredients are allowed by state in each formula. And so we are actually so excited. We recently got authorization temporary in California during the pandemic. So really exciting, to see that in our local home state. So we are the first refrigerated, baby and child food available through the WIC program. So something we're really proud of and continuing to push really hard on, because, we know that system is in place to serve that community, and we, want to be a big part of that. So to answer your question more specifically, I think it's, completely possible to have that be part of your business model, and even to help propel your business and bring growth as well.
That's great, Berkeley. Thank you very much for that. And Adrian, I have a question for you here. And this is David posed this question. How can we change businesses' mindset to be more infinite, longer term thinking in their quarterly goals or beyond, which can ultimately make them more sustainable? How do we go about doing that?
That is a good question. To me, when I was talking to Vincent Stanley, the chief philosophy officer of Patagonia, one of my frustrations was this notion of quarterly returns, and the only place to end up being a company, typically, if you weren't just going to be held as a family-owned private company, was ending up as a publicly traded equities. And to me, we need to change that as right now, that's an option. Getting bought out by a large company is an option, or staying as a family-owned company is an option. And I think we need to figure out what's another way that we could have companies be owned. And there is a lot of interesting stuff going on in Europe, go Nordics. But to me, I would look up the organization Purpose. And there's a really cool company in Oregon called the Organically Grown Company, and they're owned in a perpetual purpose trust structure, where it's actually a committee that involves the customers, the employees, as well as the past owners, that get to decide what is the future of that company. And that gives them a lot more leeway not to only play the quarterly earnings game and appease Wall Street, but they have an ownership structure that is a perpetual purpose trust, which is really thinking about that infinite mindset that you're talking about. So I do think whether it's multi-stakeholder cooperatives, perpetual purpose trusts, there are a lot of better ownership structures out there than just a C Corp that ends up being a publicly traded equity.
Oh, that's great, Adrian. And you actually mentioned the Organically Grown Company. We're working on a Berkeley Haas case that involves them, and that will be part of the Harvard Case Network and in classes. And you also mentioned Vincent Stanley, who of course is from Patagonia, and Patagonia is one of our wonderful case companies. Vincent's one of the last human beings that I saw while traveling before COVID. We had the opportunity to be invited to testify to Congress on the heels of the Business Roundtable's repurpose of the corporation to be moved from shareholder to stakeholder. And it was both inspiring to be part of that and also maddening to be part of that process, the congressional process in DC. And Vincent and I, in our discussions there, we just felt like the entire environment that when we were discussing with some of the congressional folks, it felt like we were in the 1970s. And so this is also a call for us, and here policy innovation is so important, but we also can't wait for policy. we have to create the change. And what you're doing, Adrian, and your work also is proving out the case that can have policy influences later on. I've got just one final question here, and admittedly, it's popped up on my screen. I don't know who to pose this to, and we only have time for one of you to respond to it. I'm going to read it. And if one of you is really itching to answer, shoot your hand up. Otherwise, just like in the old classroom, whoever looks the most bored, will be like, you. Okay. Final question. Sustainability or corporate social responsibility related positions are competitive, and a lot of people have studied related subjects in college. Could you comment on the speed of growth in the number of positions versus job seekers? How can we promote more job creation to meet demand of people wanting to make a difference in the environment or society? And Anne, I think if I could use my editorial authority to point that to you. Do you have a reaction to that?
It's very relevant because I'm hiring for my the previous role I was just in right now. So I do have some perspective on this.
Here come the emails. Here come the CVs. I can hear them. I hear them now.
We are in final round interviews, and we got a lot of applicants, but that was really great to see. I think this is the area that's most exciting to me. So one, I think you'll start to see things like Adrian referenced, like, Larry Fink and sort of what BlackRock, the letter that came out, like many more businesses are going to be investing in sustainability, from risk and compliance to communications to innovation to design, across the gamut. And you're going to start to see it. I know, because I still get job alerts because I'm just interested in what jobs are out there. And I see hiring at companies like Nike. I see hiring for tech companies. I see hiring for healthcare companies. Every company is hiring for sustainability in some form, it seems like. I think the thing that might be more exciting than that to me is, like, this will show my political bent, no surprise. Biden is going to, if he is able to move forward with a lot of his promises that he said in his campaign, we are going to see an enormous number of jobs created around electrification of entire industries, right? The building, the transportation industry, the retraining of fossil fuel-based employees to those two new renewable energy industries, energy efficiency industries that go along with that, new R&D energy technologies that have to support the remaining amount of, the 10 to 20% that the super aggressive deployment of wind and solar won't be able to fill. And we're still going to have a gap there. We're going to start to see job in infrastructure. Like, we're going to see jobs in places at a scale that we've never seen before in this country. Maybe not since sort of the Depression and the rise of the Civilian Conservation Corps and other types of massive federal programs like that. And there's going to be jobs on the private side and the public side. So it's not a wait, it's a, like, start keeping tabs immediately. Follow cities, follow states, follow companies, follow, there's different programs. I'm still on a newsletter called Clean Energy for Biden, which was a sort of pre-Biden's election, whole bunch of people that were raising money to support sort of environmental policies in the Biden campaign. Like, just keep your ears open, because there's going to be jobs everywhere. And that's super exciting.
Fantastic. And what a way to bring this to a close here also. Anne, Adrian Berkeley, thank you so very much for joining in this conversation, for sharing your perspectives. And on behalf of everyone, to give you a round of applause, and that comes also very much from the heart here. You're three very special people. I feel so fortunate personally to have gotten to know you as well as I have, and I'm speaking on behalf of so many in our Berkeley Haas community. Thank you so very much. One thing that I'll just say, just in closing here, that I hear is Berkeley Haas. And I draw from the defining leadership principle, question the status quo. Draw from the defining leadership principle, beyond yourself. I hear that over and over again in these themes here. And Berkeley Haas is the place to question the status quo of American capitalism for a sustainable future. So many thanks also to Mark Breitbard and Gap for the continued support of this annual celebration, even virtually here. We look forward to seeing you back in San Francisco in person next year. And I'd like to say thank you all so very much for joining us this evening. We did this virtually, but I still feel a connection, and I'm seeing the chats coming through from Zoom, and we were able to bring our community together here. So thank you so very much. I hope that you're leaving informed, inspired, and hopeful of the possibilities ahead. Go Bears!